two people, or is that us?
I don't know. I think I'm watching.
Okay.
I'm watching on here, so if people have questions, hopefully we can see that.
Welcome everybody. We are having slight camera problems, so we might have to dip down a little bit. But I guess that is better than nothing. Welcome to our first week. Oh yeah, no. Okay, never mind. Welcome to week 1 of the Felix knit along. We are really excited to be doing this. This is Caitlin and I's first live on YouTube, so we don't know what we're doing.
No.
So
we got it all set up. I've got my computer here, so if people have questions, hopefully I can see that and answer questions. And you chat while I see if I can get this camera to stay.
Oh, vamp.
Yes.
Okay, so the Felix Pullover is the pattern that we're going to be knitting over the next, oh my god, I feel like I'm going on an adventure. The pattern that we'll be knitting over the next couple of weeks. We have scheduled 5 weeks for the knit along. We may not need all 5 of them. We'll see. We'll see what everyone else is at. If you've got questions or if there's things we need to retouch base on, or questions that we didn't think about bringing up, we've got flexibility for sure.
Yeah, we kind of did a rough outline of what we need to talk about. And yes, if you have any questions, let us know and we can make sure to answer those questions.
Yes. Oh yeah, okay, I think we're just gonna have to
float
slightly this evening. This is the sweater that we're going to be making. It's the Felix Pullover. And so it's a really simple raglan sweater with this beautiful, simple lace detail that's kind of hard to see.
Yeah. You put a piece of paper behind it.
Maybe. Oh my goodness. Katie's going to be... I hope Katie has power because she's probably laughing herself.
Yes, I hope she's laughing because she's always the one who has to struggle with the camera. Now she can. Yeah, so she can laugh at us.
You can kind of see the lace detail in the yoke there. It's a very simple lace, which is one of the reasons why we like this pattern so much. And there's a little bit of challenge in there. There's some short rows on the back of the sweater to raise the neckline. Can't see them because I did such a great job.
Yeah, nice job.
And then we're going to talk about some alterations that you can make to the body of the sweater for a better fit as we go through the process of knitting the sweater. So Caitlin, what are we talking about tonight?
So tonight basically we're going to talk about gauge swatching, cast on recommendations, upper bust measuring for your sweater, so you know how you measure for the sweater, and ease. That's part of the measurements and picking your size.
Yes.
Yeah. So the cast on that it calls for, it was the tubular. Yep. So
it was a very 80s moment. Tubular.
Radical. So that's definitely a cast on that you can use, and we do have a video. Which hat was it? Was it the March hat?
No, the February one. Fernhill, I think.
Yeah, so the February hat, which is Fernhill. Emily did a really good demo of the tubular cast on.
Yes. And if you want some in-person demo, I think there's 2 spots left in my hat class starting next week at the shop, and that is the cast on we will be doing.
Perfect.
But why don't we want to do that, Caitlin?
Well, so
here's my answer. My answer is I'm lazy.
Yeah. So I actually have never done the tubular cast on because I usually just want to get started on a project and I don't really want to futz with a new cast on. So I usually just do my favorite cast on, which is the long tail cast on. And that gives me a really nice sturdy edge. Makes it easier to join in the round because you have a nice spine on it. To keep it doesn't twist easily when you're joining in the round. So I thought we could just do a little quick demo of the tubular or the long tail cast on just to give you an idea of how that one works. And the camera is at a perfect angle for us to do that.
Oh my god. It's like we planned this. Okay.
Yes.
Let me get out of your way so we can demo this.
And possibly
we didn't turn the light on.
Oh, let's turn the light on.
That would be handy.
I'm so glad you're here, Emily. Okay.
How many
Oh my goodness.
employees does it take to?
How many employees does it take to turn on a light bulb?
oh, that's good. I didn't
Yes.
think about that. I was going to say to do a live, but
Yes. Okay, so Emily has already cast on these stitches for me, so that's really handy. But if I were starting it myself, I'll just show you how to start it yourself. So you want to get your length of yarn, get a nice length of it. There are ways to calculate how much yarn you'll need for this cast on. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to lay your yarn over top, and you're going to hold the yarn in either hand. See if I can get a little closer. Do a little pivot.
yeah.
Okay. So you're going to hold your tail on one side and your working yarn on the other side. And you're going to put your fingers in through like that. And it's a little bit of a muscle memory thing. So you're going to go in through this loop on your thumb, and then out through the loop on your finger, and then out through this loop. And then you're going to pull it, not too tight. Okay, so you're going to get your fingers in there again. And it's sort of a pivot motion. And we can also do like a specific video for cast-ons another time to get a little bit of a better angle.
We 100% should do that.
Yeah. And this is the one I find is the easiest.
It's a really great stretchy cast on, which makes it perfect for anything that needs to go around a body part that you'd rather not cut the circulation off to.
Yeah, and so you can see the nice kind of stretchy edge that you get. And this is the spine I'm talking about. So it's very, I hope you can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very, very straight, and it's very hard to twist it. If it's twisted, it's pretty obvious. Yeah.
So why is it important, Caitlin, then, to notice if your spine is twisted?
So if you twist your cast on when you join to knit in the round, your whole neck will be twisted. So it'll be kind of twisted inside out.
Like a Mobius loop. Yeah.
Like a Mobius loop, yeah. Yeah, so you're going to cast on the number of stitches that you need, which they'll tell you in the pattern.
84, I think.
Yeah. And then for joining in the round,
Stitch marker.
we've got our stitch marker Emily provided. Okay. And this is where I want to make sure that none of my stitches are twisted. So I've got my kind of working yarn at the bottom, and I'm just going to, make sure that none of my stitches are twisted. So it's nice and flat, okay? And then I'm gonna put my stitch marker on. And then I'm just gonna start knitting on the end that I just started the cast on.
Yeah. So it should join in the round right away. Both your ends should be joined.
Yeah. So there you have it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's some people who will do like a little trick to kind of close up the gap on your first round, but I usually just do that at the end.
Yeah, you can sew it up with the leftover end.
Yeah,
if you
like
need to.
you might get a little bit of gapping where at the join, but that'll close up at the end.
All right.
Yeah. So that's that.
Thanks, Caitlin. Let's see if we can. Yeah, I'm gonna let
Yeah.
the camera master figure out what we're doing.
You talk. I'm gonna see if I can like
Tighten that up.
prop it up somehow.
Before we dive further into cast on ideas, we do have a question from Margaret. Thanks, Margaret, for coming by. All these videos will be, much to our chagrin, saved to our YouTube channel, so you can watch us mess up multiple times, as many times as you want. Please don't make a compilation video, or maybe do make us famous. Yeah. So if you are interested in the tubular cast on, like we said, we've got a video for the Fernhill hat on our channel. The tubular cast on is used when you want sort of your ribbing to look like it's going off into infinity. But I know I didn't use that cast on for my sample. I usually just use the long tail because it's stretchy and it's my kind of go-to always. So that is a little brief on how to start your project, how to join in the round. And then for your neckband, which is kind of where we want you to be for next week or the next video whenever you get around to watching it, is to have finished your ribbing and be ready to dive into the next part of the project, which will be on the neck. So now that we've talked about the technical, let's talk a little bit more about the theoretical, and specifically about how to make sure that your yarn and your sizing are playing nicely to get you a garment that's going to fit your body the way that you want it to. So, kind of thing number one, it's actually been behaving since you walked away.
Yeah.
Thing number one is to check the pattern for recommendations of yarn. You don't have to use whatever the pattern calls for, but what it calls for can give you insight into what you might substitute instead. So looking at the thickness or weight of the yarn is important. So this pattern calls for an Aran or chunky yarn. It's knit on 5 and 6 millimeter needles, which also gives us some insight. And then on top of that, it talks about it being worked at an open airy gauge. So that means that it's going to have a little bit of a gap between the knit stitches, and that's okay. That is intended in the pattern. It's not meant to be like a really dense, tightly knit, almost cardboard-like fabric. We're looking for something that has a little bit more movement in it.
Yeah,
So,
and that's what I really like about this sweater.
Yes.
It's not heavy.
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
It's
often a
yeah.
worsted weight sweater or an Aran weight sweater can be quite heavy.
I think we may have to take a picture of what Caitlin has managed to do. And so, check our stories on Instagram tonight, because we'll post a picture of this hack, this yarn-related hack for the camera.
Yeah, you can use yarn for anything, really.
It's so multi-purpose.
Yeah.
So, in terms
Yes.
of yarn, so we had a couple of yarns that we could pre-order for this project. And then obviously people might have yarn at home.
Yeah, I think it was the Lucky Tweed.
Yep, the Cumbria.
Cumbria, and Germantown was one of them, and
Yes.
was Madeline Tosh one of them?
I don't think so, but you could use it. I don't remember if we pre-ordered that one, but it was available.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
I think we do have a new question, if you want to jump into that before I start talking about yarn types. Also, you can tell me to shut up anytime.
Okay, so the gauge says 14 stitches for 4 inches, but my worsted yarn says 20 stitches, and I knit 20 stitches at 4 inches.
Okay.
Also, I want to make a more fitted sweater and would like to know how to modify increases.
Oh, that's a really great question. And I think we're going to answer some of those questions this evening.
Yeah, I definitely think gauge is sort of more your milieu.
Great. Let's jump in.
So, Emily,
Yeah.
please tell us about gauge.
Things to consider when knitting. Okay, so first of all, if the yarn that you have is giving you an incorrect gauge, that is sort of a sign that you might need to switch the needles that you're using. So instead of using the recommended needles, you might need to do larger or smaller. One moment, please. But let's backtrack for a second.
Okay.
What is gauge?
Yes.
We're all over the place tonight. So
Yeah.
gauge is essentially a measurement of how many stitches across and how many rows high your project is at a certain stitch on a certain needle with a certain yarn. So often when you're knitting a large project like a sweater or a blanket or anything like that, or especially something that needs to have a good fit, you'll often see people recommend that you knit a gauge swatch. And so this is a sample gauge swatch. Ironically, not for the same project, though the yarn looks identical.
Yeah.
And so essentially what you want to do is on a pair of straight needles or whatever needles you've got, you want to cast on approximately 4 inches worth of stitches, knit about 4 inches high, and I like to do a garter border with some stockinette in the middle. If your pattern has a different stitch and it's not stockinette and the gauge is not measured in stockinette, do that stitch instead.
Yeah.
Because you want what you're measuring to match whatever the tension or gauge in the patterns is.
Right, because stockinette will have a different gauge than moss stitch.
Oh, absolutely. Or a cable pattern. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're knitting a sweater or something in the round, it's also a good idea to, if you can, do a gauge swatch in the round. Because people knit and purl at different gauges. I know I did. My tension has gotten a bit better, but I used to purl wildly larger than knitting. So
I still do to some extent. It's enough that like I'm okay with doing a flat gauge. Like Caitlin makes a great point, to do a gauge in the round, you would just do it in the round like we just showed. A hat can be always a really great option if you're doing a complicated sweater. Make a little mock-up in a hat with whatever fancy pattern you're using, and that you can measure that instead. So making a gauge swatch can be really quite helpful, and a lot of the times you'll see, either with genuine concern or a little snark, if you say, my sweater doesn't fit, and people will ask you, did you knit a swatch? And lots of people don't, but it is going to be one of the tools in your basket to get a well-fit sweater. So I certainly would recommend it, especially if you haven't knit a sweater before.
Yep, definitely. Or if you're a newer knitter, and like when I was a newer knitter, my gauge was always off, and everything I made was giant, and I didn't understand why, and it was because I really needed to gauge swatch.
Yes, and that also is an excellent point about the fact that the swatch, or the tension at those needles with that yarn is really indicative only of how this designer knits.
Right.
Or an average of how her testers knit. It's not necessarily a statement on how you knit. So doing a gauge swatch is a great way to adapt whatever is put in the pattern to your own knitting style. I tend to hit kind of on the nose / a little tight most of the time. So I'm not really thrown off if I have to go up 0.5 millimeter or 1 millimeter for a pattern, because it's kind of standard at that point. But I think a lot of people don't know that that's a thing.
Yeah, and so if you can explain how you would know whether to go up or down a needle size.
So
because I always have to use my brain really to figure that out.
Use your finger.
Yes.
So first of all, you knit your swatch. Then what I would do would be measure your swatch dry, fresh off the needles. So to measure a swatch, you can have a really cool little dude. I don't know where you might get this anymore, but this is kind of cool. It's got like a 4-inch window. It's got a plexiglass. You'll see that most gauges these days are done over a 4-inch or 10 centimeter gap. So,
if you have any of our quilting rulers, they would probably work also pretty well.
Oh my god,
you little crossover
blew my
craft.
Mind.
Yeah,
they would work perfectly. Yeah. You need a quilting ruler, and then you need to learn how to quilt. Yes. Join me in my quest. So you could use that ruler measurement, which you probably can't see because my swatch
maybe
is so
show
dark.
it a little closer so you can see. There's a little window where you can kind of see your what they want you to measure. So it'll be like a 4-inch
window, and then what you would do is, knitting has columns of V's, and you would count how many columns fit within that section. Alternatively, if you don't have this or a handy quilting ruler, you can take, if you've got T-pins, safety pins, stitch markers, or what have you. So for instance, this pattern calls for 14 stitches. So I'm going to mark the beginning of my counting. I'm going to count 14 stitches across, mark the other side, I don't know what this is, and then measure that. And if that is smaller or larger, that's going to give you an indication and measure out. Or alternatively, measure with a ruler and then count in between.
Okay.
Essentially, at the end of this process, you want to know, dry right off the needles, how many stitches in 4 inches. Then, if it's even if it's on the nose, wash your swatch. Wash your swatch the way that you are going to wash your finished garment, which is kind of what we recommend when you're working with fabric too. And that's really important because different yarns behave differently when they're washed. A superwash yarn will grow like the dickens. Yeah, it's just a matter of fact.
It doesn't, the process of superwash makes the yarn not stick to itself, so it doesn't shrink or felt. And what ends up happening is when you wash it, it doesn't stick to itself, so it can sort of sag. Yeah,
sag down a bit. And so on, say, a hat, you might not notice it as much, but with all the fabric and the weight of a sweater, you will notice it when you start to wear it. So wash your swatch, and then if you're working with superwash and you're at all concerned, especially if you're knitting a larger size, if you're working with a yarn that's heavier or has a proclivity to stretch, so cotton, alpaca, superwash, you might want to weight your squash. Weight your squash. Weight your swatch. So that would be to take one of those like pants hangers, line up your damp swatch, so get it wet and then press it dry. Line up the top in one of those pants hangers, and then maybe put a couple of like wooden clothespins, just enough weight so that there's a little something pushing, because this weighs a lot less than a full sweater.
It's the weight of the sweater is gonna pull it down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then once it's dry, measure your swatch again, because this might grow or this might grow. And ideally what you want is to know what the wash dimensions are. But if you have anxiety like I do, you also want to know what the dry previous dimensions are, so that when you're measuring your swatches you're knitting, you're not going, oh my god, it's wrong, it's wrong.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So it's a good thing to have both those pieces of information. Okay, now we're going to get to the question.
Yes.
Which is, what do I do if my swatch is wrong? So if your swatch, what was the measurements?
So the gauge says 14 stitches in 4 inches, but my worsted yarn says 20 stitches, and I knitted 20 stitches at 4 inches.
Okay. So couple things. The ball band will probably have a tighter gauge than is recommended in the pattern, because like we said, this is knitted a more airy, looser gauge than like a standard knit.
When you look at the ball band, it's a suggestion of what most people are likely to knit with it. But because this sweater is knit at such a large gauge,
by comparison,
it's not going to, you're not going to find a yarn that says that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That being said, if you've swatched and you're still discovering that you're getting 20 stitches over the 4 inches, then that means you're going to need to change your needle size. Or alternatively, you could change the size that you knit. That has a little less of a guarantee of success. So if this is your first sweater, I would try and get your swatch in as close as possible, as opposed to changing the size you're knitting, because the dimensions of like how deep your yoke is, where your sleeve sits and stuff like that, that will change depending on the size that you knit, so it's a little bit more of a complicated solution.
Right.
So if you are measuring your swatch and it's a bigger number, so instead of 14 stitches, it's 20 stitches, that means you need to go up a needle size.
Right.
And make sure that you're swatching on your larger needles. So the pattern calls for 6 millimeters, the body needle. That's the size you want to be swatching on. And so if 6 is too small, then try 7
Or 6.5.
Yeah, 6.5 is kind of hard to find. Oh, I could go on a rant about the American needle system. Don't get me started.
Yeah.
6.5 and
we're talking millimeters.
yes, 6.5 and 7 millimeter can be hard to find. 8, it's going to be a lot easier, but if you can get those in between sizes, that'll probably get you closer to where you want to go.
Yeah.
Yes, and do make sure that you're using a 6 millimeter, not a US 6. Because a worsted weight yarn on a US 6 is actually going to get you closer to 20 stitches.
Yeah, a lot of projects for worsted weight are knit on a 4 or 4.5.
Yeah.
Like a hat would be knit on.
Yeah, which would be like a US 6, US 7.
Yeah.
So hopefully that helps. And then in the reverse is also true. So if you're knitting and all of a sudden your swatch tells you 10 stitches over 4 inches, oh my god, you need to shrink down. So try knitting again on a 5.5 or a 5 millimeter and see how that goes. And then you're going to adjust your smaller needle accordingly. So if you are going to end up knitting your main sweater on an 8 millimeter, try doing your ribbing on a 6. If you're going to knit your main sweater on a 5, try doing your ribbing on a 4 or a 4.5. Because you want your ribbing to come in a little bit and to rip appropriately around the choke points. Sounds violent.
There must be a name for that.
Yeah, the choke points. The points of vulnerability.
Right. Yeah, okay, so I think that helps. I think knowing how to adjust your needle size to get the right gauge is really helpful.
And I think half the battle is knowing that it's totally normal to have to change your needle size, and it's not a reflection of you as a knitter or your skill level or anything like that. I think a lot of new knitters feel like somehow they're the villain in the situation because they can't get what the designer got. And that's not it at all. We all knit differently. We all knit at different tensions.
Exactly.
Some of us knit while watching scary movies, and that will play with your tension, right? It
Sure will.
plays with mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other main thing we wanted to talk about was choosing the size of your sweater and how to measure.
Yeah.
Here, do you want to?
Yeah,
Measure
so in the pattern it says to measure your upper bust, and most patterns, a lot of patterns will tell you to measure your bust. And
your full bust.
Yeah, your full bust. And I actually contacted the designer because I was kind of confused about this. And what she said, to clarify, she wants you to measure your upper bust. So that is, if I can stand like this.
Yeah. There you go, you're in frame.
Yeah, I'm in frame.
Yep.
So instead of measuring across
Mm-hmm.
the fullest,
Which is
your bust apex,
yeah.
they want you to measure
Yes.
the top of your bust, kind of where your underarms are. And that gives a more accurate, an accurate measurement,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can do a full bust adjustment
Mm-hmm.
if you need to.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so I have one knitting friend in particular who consistently knits sweaters too big for herself, and it just feels so bad. She always gets to the yoke part and she's going, oh no, it's not big enough, it's not big enough.
Yeah.
So the reason why you want to measure under the bust is you really want it to fit well in the underarm area,
Right.
and you don't want it to be too baggy. So that's, quite helpful in this particular pattern.
Yeah, because like Catherine explained to me recently, because I have to do full bust adjustments for my sewing. I haven't so much for my knitting. I've been really lucky in the patterns I fit. I like kind of like a boxy, loose fit for my sweaters, and sweaters have more of a stretch to them. But for sewing, the way she explained it was that in general, our frame is the same. It's the padding that's different. So measuring the upper bust is sort of more your frame.
That's a great way
And
to
then
think about it.
the full bust adjustment is kind of like the padding.
Yeah.
Yeah. That made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna steal that.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty genius. Yeah, so we'll fit the frame up here, and then we will do some fancy magic next week,
Yes.
or the week afterwards. The week afterwards. So
Yeah.
once you've measured your upper bust, you'll see that the pattern gives you finished measurements, so that's where it's going to sit. And so something that I wanted to talk about when you're choosing your size is ease. So ease is how much extra fabric or how little extra fabric a piece has. So if something has 0 ease, it means it sits exactly on your body. If it has positive ease, there's extra fabric, so like a more boxy fit. And then if there is negative ease, it's like sculpted to your body.
Yeah, and everybody likes a different fit.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So this sweater is sort of designed as I call it like a sweatshirt kind of sweater, but you may wear your sweatshirts tighter or looser, so you pick a size based on that.
Yeah.
What kind of fit you want.
Exactly. And so she mentions that she uses 7 inches of positive ease. So what you would want to do is take your measurement up here and then add 7 inches. If you want it to be as close to what's in the pattern picture, add 7 inches to that number. So if you measured 40, add 7 inches, that's 47. And then it looks like there's a size 48 inches. So I'd probably knit that in that case. In my case, I have an over 60-inch bust. I knit the largest size.
Okay.
But I really like a negative ease fit around the bust. And then I like a more 0 to slightly positive ease fit around the midsection.
Yeah.
So I knit the largest size, which was going to be a little tight up here. And then I did some fabulous bust shaping with some short rows in the front.
Perfect.
To keep the bottom hemline down as low. So, if you have a larger bust, I'm sure you know, if you put on a random t-shirt right out of the store, it tends a tendency to pull up in the front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the shaping at the back will also help with that too, right?
Lie correctly on your neck and shoulders,
Yeah.
and then If you are interested, you can join me for the front bust shaping, which I'm now officially obsessed with, and every Felix I knit from now on will have this. And then when we get to the body of the sweater, we're also going to talk about waist shaping.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we should save some of that.
Oh,
for,
yes.
For that. We won't go too into that.
No.
But yeah, you can definitely, you know, for your first sweater, it's good to kind of follow as much of the instructions as you can.
Yeah.
And we'll just give you some ideas of how you can modify.
Exactly.
You know, there's the cool thing about making your own clothes is you can really adjust them to fit.
And
exactly.
This is kind of like a perfect pattern for that, because you have something fun and jazzy in the section that you're probably not going to modify, and then the rest is sort of this blank slate that's in kind of a boxy fit, and you can sculpt it however you want. And so I was really excited to do this sweater as a knit along, because this is the first time I think I've ever felt so in control of the shaping of a sweater for myself, and like how I could visualize what I wanted and turned it into
for sure
into a sweater.
So we have 2 questions, or I think it's just one question, but hold on here. Somebody says, the Melbourne tweed is so beautiful. I plan to just do my swatch this past weekend and finish the weekend 1 round of 8 into the raglan increases.
That's me. So
a little eager.
Oh God. So I had a friend who cast on when I was at a cottage 2 weekends ago, and I was just kind of enviously watching her cast on, and so I've started.
Yeah.
But I have to stop. I have to stop at my ribbing. I'm fully on the ribbing. I finished the ribbing. I'm on my large needle.
Yeah.
And I can't do anymore because I have to demonstrate the short rows next week.
So sad.
So I cast on a frog instead.
Oh, frog.
Yeah.
Cute. My kid's obsessed with frogs right now. Okay, so Julie says, hello!
Hello, Julie.
And at what point do we start bust shaping? What is the cup size of the Felix?
That is a great question. The answer is we don't know what the cup size of the Felix is. I'd say it's probably standard.
Yeah, I think like for sewing patterns, it's usually like a C.
Yeah, like a B or a C.
A B or a C, so it's not big. But the bust shaping starts after you separate for the sleeves, so you don't have to do that.
So the order will be next week we're going to talk about the short rows for the neck. We're going to talk about doing the raglan increase. Then the following week we're going to, and you know, your homework between the weeks will be like to finish the raglan section. Then the following week we'll split for the kitty cat. We'll split for the body and the sleeves. And he's gone. We'll do some short row shaping for the bust. We'll talk about waist increases. So it's not till the 3rd week that we're really diving into that part.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I know Julie's probably
chomping at the bit.
Well, she got her yarn. She caked up her yarn. She's super excited.
Like, so. Julie, you know how to get a hold of me. You can ask me what to do. You don't have to wait.
Yes. She says she's working on the 12.5 section. So she's already working.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm
so
so jealous of all you people that get to start. Damn it.
And somebody says, I'm so excited about this Kal. Thanks so much for doing this. I'm super pleased with my Irish tweed. I love it.
It's so
If you're
pretty.
talking about the Kelborn woolens, it is so gorgeous.
Oh my God.
There's, I was taking pictures of them the other day, and the neps and little flecks of color in there, it's gorgeous.
I have this thing after having been immersed in yarn for a decade.
Yeah.
I just have this need, you see something really pretty and you're like, I need to smell it.
Yeah.
I know it's not going to smell of anything.
Yeah.
Because it's I don't know, years, months from the barn, but I still need to smell it.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
Just so juicy.
Well, we were at Twist and we went into Ash Alberg's stall and we were like, oh my gosh, and we smelled the yarn immediately and they were like, oh, you must know yarn. Yes, we do. We know it's going to smell amazing, and it sure did. Yeah.
Any last questions? Because I feel like we're
kind of winding down. Yeah. Thanks so much for the gauge coaching. I've started the raglan section. Yes, Culver woolens.
Oh,
Yeah.
actually, I do have a last observation about gauge,
Okay.
which is, as I was coaching a friend through the beginning part of the casting on, I realized as flipping through the pattern that the pattern doesn't really doesn't split into different instructions for different sizes until
Okay.
you're about 2 repeats of the raglan section.
Right.
So if you wanted to be irresponsible, and I'm not advocating this, but if you wanted to be irresponsible and also didn't care if you had to rip back, you could start your sweater and then measure your gauge once you've hit that point, or
That's
knit
a good
4
point.
inches of the sweater.
Yeah, that is a good point. I am a gauge cheater, I will admit, because I've kind of figured out my, you know, I'm
Comes with
usually
practice.
fine.
Yeah, it
It's
comes
usually
with
fine.
practice, yeah.
But yeah, I often do that with a sweater where I'm just like, oh, I'll just knit. I'll just measure the gauge once I've knit enough on the chest,
Yes.
right? Because I think the instructions for this, it's the same, like you said.
Until you get
You cast on a certain number for all sizes, and then it's only at a certain point they tell you keep going for the larger sizes. Yeah, so you can definitely do that.
Just, if you're the kind of person that will be miserable for 6 months because you have to rip out, maybe do your swatch instead.
Yeah. The other point that I wanted to say was because there are short rows pretty early on in the pattern, I think the short rows start almost right after the after the ribbing.
Immediately
right?
after
Pretty
the
much
ribbing.
right after.
The next row,
I'm somebody who likes to do magic loop.
Yeah.
I would not recommend doing the magic loop for the short row section at least.
Okay.
Because it was very confusing.
Yeah.
Because I'm somebody who has to really follow the instructions for short rows. I'm not just like, oh, I know what's happening, I can take it from here.
Yeah.
I have to follow row by row what they're doing. And a magic loop really doesn't work with the short row section of this sweater.
That's such a good observation, because I am old school based on how I was trained. I have a circular in every size. And so I just work my way up, and I don't often do magic loop unless I'm desperate. But thank you for that. And I also remembered something else I wanted to say about gauge.
Oh.
I swear to God, if you get me started, I will not stop. I don't get to do this in my 9 to 5. So if you are struggling to get either row or stitch gauge, because that can be kind of difficult to get both of them, aim for stitch gauge.
Which is the width.
Which is the width, that's how many stitches fit in there instead of how many rows. Aim for your stitch, because that's going to be how it fits around your body.
Right.
And then you can adjust. First of all, if that happens, I would double check by washing your swatch to see if it's going to grow vertically. And then you can kind of mentally say, okay, well, I probably need a few extra rows, or I'm over, so I'm going to need a few fewer rows, and keep that in mind when you're doing your your yoke, as well as the body and the end of your sleeves as well.
Yeah, and you can also, because it's a top-down sweater, you can also try it on.
Yeah.
That's what I love about top-down.
And I don't know if we'll get, weather permitting, maybe we'll try ours on when we split for the sleeves.
Right.
If it's this warm, I'm not doing it.
Yes.
I'm just not doing it.
And for our next demos, we'll do like an overhead so you can really see what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because we're just getting the hang of this.
Yeah, I'm looking at my yarn choice. I'm like, I think I'm going to have to cast on in a lighter yarn to do the short row demo.
Yeah.
And then as a teaser for next week, we're not going to show you how they do short rows in the pattern. Welcome to our knit along, where we tell you to do a different cast on in different short rows. I'm going to show you the German short row method. It is like soups easy. Would recommend. Once I learned it, I pretty much substitute it into every pattern. So it's my go-to. It's a lot easier, and I, at this point, can relatively confidently say that I don't have to look it up, whereas a wrap and turn method, I always have to look up what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. Somebody says, I found a tricky instruction on page 3, short row 4, when it starts a parenthetical instruction.
Okay, short row 4.
I guessed on instruction, but expect you will clarify it next week.
Yes.
Yeah, so we will clarify next week. I know there was a part in the short rows, because like I said, I always have to follow to the letter exactly what's happening and really pay attention.
Yeah.
And with the short rows, you are doing your short rows at the same time as some of your increases.
Yeah.
And that I had to do it a couple times because that was tripping me up a little bit. So we'll give you a little heads up on that.
And my game plan, I mean, grab your popcorn, because I'm planning to do all, 8 short rows?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm planning to do all 8 short rows. I'm not just going to be like, this is how you do German short rows. I'm planning to do all of them.
Okay.
On screen.
And I'll be mixing her a drink off camera.
And then I'll be rolling myself home at the end of the evening. But so we'll be able to go through all of the short row section together.
Okay.
And then Caitlin will lead us through the shaping the raglan. And once you hit that part, baby, you're home free.
Yeah.
Well, mostly home free.
Yeah, it's really smooth sailing after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll get through the hard part together.
Cool.
Yay.
Okay, well, I think that's kind of it.
I think so.
I think that's all the questions people had, and some of the things that we're going to cover next week.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
This is a bit of a verbal vomit situation where it's just like, here's all our information. We're really excited.
Yeah. So this will be fun.
Yeah.
So let us know. You can
send us messages.
Send us a message or pop into the shop anytime.
Yeah.
Ask us questions.
Yep. Send us an email. Yeah.
Yep.
And we also have a fabrications group on Facebook called Fabrications Social, SEWCIAL.
Mm-hmm.
Feel free to join. You can pose your questions there.
Yep.
I think most of the staff members are on there.
Yeah.
And we can answer your questions there too.
Awesome.
All right.
Okay.
Now, do we know how to hang out?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye.